have with us Carlo Fanelli. Carlo is a PhD candidate in sociology at Carleton University, where he is also a founding member of the Critical Social Research Collaborative. In addition to this, he has been a part-time employee with the City of Toronto for over 10 years. He is here tonight to discuss the origin, process, and outcome, as well as the future goals of the recent Toronto Workers' Assembly, an initiative he's involved in aimed at organizing working-class communities in the GTA. So thank you, Carlo.
Thanks, Priscilla, for the introduction, and thanks Organizing for Justice for putting this together, and to our previous two speakers. When trying to put this talk together, an initial difficulty I tried was to navigate my relationship with the Toronto Workers' Assembly and how exactly I fit in. So like Priscilla mentioned, I've worked with the City of Toronto Parks, Forestry and Recreation for about the last 10 years, and through that have had the invaluable experience of working with such groups as Action for Neighborhood Change, as well as some more local initiatives like the Youth Action Crews, they're called. In terms of my other hat, as a student and activist, I've been involved with organizations like Ontario Coalition Against Poverty and No One Is Illegal, as well as the Socialist Project and the Popular Education Alliance. In any case, for roughly the last 2 years, I've been spending my spring and summer in Toronto and my fall and winter in Ottawa. But it wasn't really until last March that I really got involved with the coordinating committee that sought to put together the Toronto's Workers' Assembly. And by that point, they had already been in talks for at least 2 years, trying to figure out exactly some common strategies and mobilization efforts, and had been actively planning for at least the last 8 months. Needless to say, by the time I got involved, they had already been planning for quite some time. Although I was certainly a part of the planning and organizing committee, I'm not quite sure I'm a representative of the movement as a whole, but in any case, I digress. In what follows, I will try to emphasize the planning and preparation that went into the assembly, and the kinds of discussions that emerged in the past years of the consultas leading up to it. After that, I will speak to how the 3-day meeting played out, its outcome, as well as highlight some future plans of its participants. The approach taken by the organizers of the Toronto Workers' Assembly draw from, of course, earlier experiences within the city trying to rebuild the left, but really drew inspiration from strategies and movements emerging throughout the Global South, and interestingly enough, in the U.S. In the U.S., in the spring of 2006, activists, labor organizers, and community groups came together to initiate a Center for Labor Renewal. The larger context of the meeting was highlighted by a heightened attack against working-class standards and the inability of the U.S. labor movement, as well as its opposition political parties, to develop a matching response. The Center for Labor Renewal stressed the need for a fresh organizational approach based on new strategies, new alignments, and new objectives. That organizational form was dubbed Workers' Assemblies. What led to this? Well, first, the traditional left identification of working class with the unionized sector simply wouldn't do anymore, where only 1 in 10 Americans were unionized or are currently unionized. Likewise, the left, whether independent or informal groups, was also at an impasse, as was the anti-globalization movements and the World Social Forum. The need, therefore, arose to broaden the scope of what working-class activism meant. Like the Center for Labor Renewal, the Toronto Workers' Assembly's organizers, initially emerging out of the Socialist Project, Labor Committee, but having later expanded to include a much broader working group, had to have some frank discussions and on some contested terms and heavy historical baggage. This included what exactly was meant by working class and intersecting forms of oppression and marginalization. What would a transformative vision of society include? What are we doing independently? What could we potentially be doing together? And what separates or unites us, and so forth. The starting point was not so much to launch a preformed set of local assemblies, but to begin a process. The first step was to identify, in a range of urban centers, all those groups currently involved in actions to defend or extend people's rights and needs. This included discussions with local unions, anti-poverty and employment groups, groups servicing immigrants, anti-racist and groups involved in women's shelters, groups working with youth, indigenous struggles, and international solidarity groups, etc. The next step was to engage these groups in a discussion of the limits of their own struggles and how we might, within a larger collectivity, address those limits. This included collective dialogue, discussion papers, and small meetings for frank and sober exchange of goals, strategies, tactics, and the like. The desire was that the assembly wouldn't be just another forum or event or something leading up to, nor focus upon a particular single campaign, as the consequent tendency has been to dissolve as everyone returns to their own groups and campaigns. The suggestion was that that each citywide assembly would be a permanent structure made up of representatives of the various groups that met regularly, had an elected accountable steering committee that began moving towards pooling resources for mutual support. This included things like a common newsletter, website, educational forum, pamphlets, new campaigns, expanding public education, and eventually moving towards an independent political platform. The focus was on unity and developing our working class capacities and overcoming the isolationist tendencies characterized by exclusionary and members-only exclusive cliques, and a prioritization over processes, activities, and movements, as opposed to simply paying dues, for example. The objective was that although assemblies would be built locally, the dynamics of their functioning would force the crucial question of a larger coordinating body, since, for example, job issues, immigration, environment, and imperialism are issues which go beyond the local. As well, an emphasis was placed on the necessity of solidarity and the need to learn from other struggles, implying an international sensibility. The sentiment was that the right, in most cases, is always organized and needs no formal unions, bodies, and officers, though of course they do exist. And especially telling Consulta, leading up to the assembly, were discussions of what is meant by working classes. A good many social activists were hesitant to identify with working class, conflating it with the bureaucratized unions that emerged to represent mostly white males in primarily blue-collar industries. Some are also suspicious because they see the term as taking away, even subordinating, other oppressions and identities. Still others are suspicious of crude attempts to reduce all oppressions to that of class. What emerged through our discussions of how we address the issue of class, however, was that rather than retreating from the notion of class politics, the emphasis would be to get at shared social relationships within capitalism that cuts across and potentially bridges other oppressions. The understanding which emerged from the Consulta process was that it's not only about the employed, but it's also about the underemployed, the unemployed, and those denied a chance to work, including part-time and precarious workers, those with familial responsibilities, the differently abled, and the ill, whose skills are apparently uncompetitive in a profit-driven world. The working class, understood in its broadest terms, is about all of these people and their families, and doesn't purport to end or erase differences. What we were calling the working class is inherently diverse and is constantly in flux in terms of how it sees itself and how it relates to others within the class. The hope, or at least the challenge, wasn't to homogenize diversity, but to actively build and shape the fragments and divisions into a social force. The response was that class oppression is experienced in our homes, in our communities, and in our workplaces. Thus, making the working class as a social force depends on recognizing and developing these collective capacities, which is about more than just the sale of our labor power. Another central theme running through our consultatives was that a movement that truly aims to contribute to building a working class, one that can transform itself into a collective agent capable of transforming society, needs a vision. As one of the Assembly's participants, Sam Gindin, has written elsewhere, absent such a vision, talk of reform and revival has no anchor to sustain or orient its struggles. Needless to say, collective capacities rarely spontaneously emerge. The Consulta process, then, sought to actively build and develop our capacities together. This meant attracting new people to an exciting project with new possibilities, conveying to progressive union locals that this process carries hope, discovering more strength through political mapping of communities and corresponding exchanges with groups, learning how to work collectively and democratically with diverse sectors of the working class, rejuvenating already existing movements, and overcoming the fatalism that saps the mobilizing energy of activists. Moreover, there was an understanding that it would be a serious mistake to rush into any such project and to underestimate the difficulties that would surely emerge. Likewise, a great deal of participants suggested that the NDP is not the answer, ideologically or organizationally, to bringing the working class into motion, since it has no transformative vision of society. But the difficulty remained. Even if we could get it started, it could not be sustained without a great deal of creativity and organizational work. Our history is littered with projects initiated amid high expectations and newfound enthusiasm, which then floundered because of lack of participation and direction. Also, the creation of struggles that attempt to bridge these fragmented efforts has been done before with mixed outcomes. In particular, the lesson learned was that issues or groups tend to fade as the issue or movement fades. While there are, of course, important experiences and lessons, the emphasis emerging throughout the Consulta process and, as I will soon get to, the Assembly itself, was on creating permanent structures to use as points of attack against the encroachments of capital. This included building the kind of popular understandings, political capacities, and organizational forms that can actually win substantive reforms, let alone change the world. It was clear to many participants through our meetings that given the scale and scope of what we're up against, organizing around specific issues and particular constituencies, as impressive and energetic as that may be, cannot add up to the kind of strength we need to bring about real, as opposed to simply rhetorical change. Now, without further ado, let me get to the conference itself, which took place from Friday, October 2nd to Sunday, October 4th. Though it was originally scheduled at the Steelworkers Hall, we had to move it last minute to the University of Toronto. So Friday evening began with a talk by Steve Williams, who was involved with an organization in San Francisco called POWER, People Organized to Win Employment Rights. He was introduced by Stephanie Ross and Sam Gindin, who are well-known activists in circles in Toronto and abroad. He gave an inspiring talk about how, since the early 1990s, they had been organizing working-class communities and the struggles, challenges, and barriers they'd have to overcome. Now, I don't want to focus on that